Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are reading Among the Impostors. We are on page 108. Now, like I said, I wanted to be able to finish this between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I will be sending out an email if I haven't already, or a Google question of if we're going to keep reading the next ones into the summer. But there are more books in this series, but I definitely wanted to finish this one for the official school time. So, where we left off, Luke he kind of snuck out and he learned about some of the other kids at this school and maybe why they are there or different things about the school, and he's becoming quite informed into what's happening. Now, where does this leave him? We're gonna find out. Remember, he said Jen's name, and everyone looked at him in awe because I'm wondering, did they talk to him? Did they just hear or talk to her? Did they just hear about her? But we've got more information to find out, and where is this book going to lead us? So, here we go. Also, if you look at my hand and you're like, what happened? I had a fight with a popcorn machine at the campground. I was cleaning it out, and oh well. I'm okay, though. So, we are starting on page 108. Luke didn't go back to his garden by himself anymore, but 2 or 3 times a week, Jackal Boy would whisper in his ear, "Tonight," and Luke's heart would jump. Tonight meant, we're going to the woods. We're meeting the girls. Each time he stepped outside, Luke would breathe in deeply, the same way a starving man gobbled down food. But he noticed that most of the others, also brave and imposing indoors, positively cowered in the open air. They squeezed their eyes shut and took halting steps forward like condemned men walking to their executions. "You don't like the outdoors, do you?" Luke asked Trey once as they walked across the lawn to the wood. Trey shook his head slowly, as if moving too quickly might make him throw up. He looked a little green already. "It's better in the woods," he said through gritted teeth. "At least they are recovered." But Luke took another long, deep breath, savoring the smell of newly mowed grass and spring rain. He couldn't understand Trey. "Do you hate being cooped up all the time? Or don't you hate being cooped up all the time?" Trey gave him a sidelong glance. "I spent 13 years in the same room. I didn't step foot outside even once until I came here." "Oh," Luke said. He suddenly saw that for a third child he'd been very lucky. Before the government tore down the woods behind his house and built a neighborhood there instead, he'd spent most of his time outdoors. Except for not going to school, he hadn't lived that differently from his older brothers. He couldn't imagine spending 13 years in the same room. "Jen went shopping on fake passes," he told Trey. "Her mother took her to playgroups. I thought other third children lived like her." "I wouldn't know," Trey said. I wish." He hesitated. "I miss my room." Luke felt sorry for the other boy. How many of his other new friends had basically lived their entire lives in a box? He watched Jackal Boy running ahead, then circling back to the others. Jason must have been like Jen," Luke said. "He must have gotten out a lot. He's not afraid of anything." "No," Trey said. "He's not. He says he's overcome all of his hiding-related phobias, and he's only been here for a few weeks longer than you." "He has?" Luke asked in surprise. He assumed Jackal Boy was a long-timer with years of experience at Hendrix. The rest of us only started last fall," Trey continued. "I think." No one talked much before Jason got here. Before he could make sense of that, Luke had to remind himself all over again that Jason was really Jackal Boy. It was no wonder that Luke had been confused when he first started at Hendrix. The boys, at least the ones he hung out with now, did go by 3 or 4 names. They might answer to the first or last part of their fake name at school, and the first or last part of their real name out in the woods. That was riskier. A few just went by initials. Trade explained that his name just meant 3. He wouldn't tell even Jackal Boy his real name. They reached the woods, and what Trey had said finally sunk in. "Wait a minute," Luke said. "You mean you weren't all friends before Jason came? You haven't been meeting in the woods all along?" Trey flashed him a puzzled look. "Just since April," he said. Luke's mind was racing. "The rally was in April," he said. "Yeah," Trey said with a shrug. The girls met them then, and they started the same kind of banter Luke had witnessed the first night. It sounded different to Luke now, not as if they were all worldly and experienced, but as if they were reading lines in a play, pretending to talk to each other the way normal boys and girls talked. Nina made jokes about how stupid boys were, and Jason made fun of the girls. Luke watched the faces of the ones who were quiet. They all looked scared. What's this meeting for? Luke asked suddenly. Jason turned to look at Luke in surprise. Why, we're planning ways to resist the government over the population law, to follow up the rally. The rally, Nino echoed wistfully. Luke's heart beat fast. This wasn't what he wanted. He'd wanted to do something brave like Jen. It would be like apologizing to her for not going with her, for doubting her. But could he be as brave as Jen? Without dying, too? How? He demanded. How are we going to resist? Nina and Jason looked at each other. Well, that's what we're deciding, Nina said, just like a boy asking dumb questions. But they didn't decide on anything that night. They just joked around some more, made a game of guessing one boy's real name, and headed back to their schools. Jason pulled Luke aside as they stepped back into the school building. Not everyone's as ready as you, he said. You've got to give the others time. As long as they're trembling in their shoes every time they step outside, they'll never make good sub-30s. Luke was flattered. It made sense. Okay, he said. Jason playfully punched Luke's arm. Knew you'd understand. Hey, you ready for finals? Finals? Luke asked. You know, next week, end of term tests, Jason said. You pass, you get out of here. You fail, you get stuck for life. Luke stopped short. Oh no, he breathed. Jason laughed. Scared you, huh? Remember, you stay on my good side, I'll make sure your parents get to look at a brilliant report. I'm not even going to the right classes, Luke said, panic coursing through his veins. And I can't ask anyone now. It's been too long. I'll find out for you, Jason said, laughing again. He was already halfway down the hall. Chapter 24. Jason was as good as his word. The next morning at breakfast, he handed Luke a computer printout that said at the top, class schedule for Lee Grant. It had times, room numbers, and teachers' names. Where'd you get this? Luke asked. You think your only computer hacker friend is dead? Jason said. He meant Jen. Luke had a flash of missing her all over again. He could picture her sitting at the computer, typing fast. She created a chat room for third children with the password of free. She connected hundreds of third children so they weren't just sitting in their little rooms all alone. She hacked into the records of the National Police to make sure none of the kids going to the third child rally were caught before they got to the Capitol. But what good had all of her hacking done? Earth to Lee, Jason was saying, or whatever your name is. You should know, your schedule doesn't really matter. I can change all your grades on the computer anyhow. But after breakfast, Luke determinedly marched off to his first class, listened closely, and took detailed notes. By the end of the hour, he knew something he'd never known before. Prime numbers could be divided only by themselves and won. In his second class, he boldly grabbed a textbook off the bookshelf and read the poem whose page number the teacher had written on the board. He could even make sense of the fancy language. 2 people were friends, and one of them died, and the other one felt sad. Luke figured he had an unfair advantage understanding that. In science and technology class, the teacher was talking about gasoline motors. Luke could just picture one, all grease-covered in Father's tractor, and now he knew how they worked. By lunchtime, Luke was ready to brag to Jason, I am learning something now. He was even confident enough to tease, maybe I won't need your help with my grades. You're going to learn a whole term's worth in just 1 week, Jackalboy mocked. Right. Next Friday at 5 o'clock, you'll come begging. Please, please, I'll need help. I'll do anything. Luke only set his jaw and pulled out a book to study. Chapter 25. By the end of the week, all the teachers had test dates written in chalk on their blackboards, and Luke was spending every spare moment studying. Why? Trey asked him one night as they were trudging out to the woods. Jason can fix your grades, and it's not like your real parents are going to see him anyways. When you were stuck in your room, Luke said, didn't you ever want to know about anything about the outside world? About whether other people were like you or different, or whether grass grows the same way all over the world, or how a car runs? Not really, Trey said. Luke was sorry he couldn't help explain. It wasn't the grades themselves that mattered to him, but he felt like he had something to prove. Maybe that people from the country, Leckers, weren't so dumb after all. Maybe Jen's dad hadn't risked his life for nothing. Getting Luke a fake identity. Maybe that Luke wasn't wasting time just hanging out in the woods making jokes with the girls from Harlow while other third children still had to hide. He was surprised that, with each day that passed, his classes made more sense to him. The teachers weren't really that bad, just distant. The history teacher, Mr. Dirk, could tell fascinating stories about kings and knights and battles, and they were all true. The literature teacher could recite whole poems from memory. Luke didn't always understand all the words, but he liked the cadence and rhyme. The math teacher said once, "Aren't numbers friendly?" And he really seemed to believe it. Luke wondered if the teachers were shy too, if they had some of those phobias Trey and Jason had talked about, and were downright terrified of looking their students straight in the eye. The night before his first test, Luke studied through dinner and skipped going to the woods with all the others during indoctrination so he could hunch over in a hallway reading his history. Jason mocked him. "What are you trying to do, bookworm? Learn as many big words as Trey? And you could read all night and still not pass your tests. Come on." "Leave me alone," Luke growled, eager to get back to the Trojan War. Luke was surprised that Jason stepped back instead of insisting. "Fine," he said. "Waste your time. See if I care." The words sounded like the swaggering boy Luke was used to, but his tone seemed to say something else. So did the set his shoulders had as he walked away. He sounded wary, on edge. Could Jason possibly be scared of Luke? Luke was nobody. Jason was in charge. Luke decided he was imagining things and went back to his book. Still, after lights out, Luke couldn't sleep. He was too unsettled, worried about the test the next day, wondering what his family was doing back home, wishing Jen were there to figure out Jason for him. He even thought back to the advice Jen's dad had written for Luke. Blend in. Who was Luke supposed to blend in with? The boys who trudged blindly through the halls each day? The ones who followed Jason? Or Jason himself? Somewhere in the room, a bed creaked. Luke thought it was just someone turning over in his sleep, but he stiffened anyways, and listened hard. There's a pat, pat, pat that could have been footsteps, or could have been Luke's imagination, and then the hall light shone briefly into the room as the door opened and closed. Luke sat up. He crept over to the door and opened a crack so he'd have light to see by. All the beds were filled with sleeping boys except two, Luke's and Jason's. Chapter 26. Luke took time to grab one of his textbooks so he'd have an excuse if someone caught him out of his room after lights out. "I only wanted to study some more," he said. "I'm worried about my tests." But the only person who might catch him was Jason. Out in the dimly lit hall, Luke looked back and forth, not sure which way to go. Probably Jason had only needed to go to the bathroom, and Luke was foolish to follow him. Luke headed towards the bathroom first. Why did I think to go to the bathroom after lights out, back when I was trying to find a place to read my note? Luke wondered. But Luke had been too terrified back then to think like that. He wouldn't have dared leave his bed. He had actually blended in quite well, and if I'd read the note right away, I wouldn't have discovered the door to the outdoors or the woods. I wouldn't have had those few days of setting up my garden. He still missed his garden. He tried not to think about it, and I never would have gotten to know anybody. But how well did he know his new friends? The only friend he'd ever had before was Jen, and that friendship had been entirely different. It wasn't fair to compare. He sneaked quietly down the hall, feeling foolish. Of course Jason would be in the bathroom, and he'd only have rude comments and mockery for Luke when he saw him. "Can't even pee without your books, huh?" Or maybe even, "Hey, Lecker, we've got toilet paper here and everything. You won't need to use that." The bathroom was empty. Luke backtracked and glanced in his room again. Jason's bed was still empty. Luke went the opposite direction from the bathroom. All that lay down this hall was the back stairs. Maybe Luke wouldn't look for Jason anymore. What did he think he was going to do when he found him? But Luke was so thoroughly awake now that he decided he might as well study. The details of the Trojan War and the Polynesian War were blurring in his mind. He went over to the stairwell and sat down on the top step. He leaned against the walls, opened his book, and began reading. The Greeks fought battles for... Far below, someone was murmuring. Luke sat still for a minute, tempted to ignore it. It probably was Jason, but so what? If he was having a secret meeting without Luke, why should he care? It wasn't like Jason's gang ever planned anything real anyways. But Luke did care. If Jason's gang was going to help third children, Luke owed it to himself, his family, to Jen's dad, to take part. Luke eased down to the next step, and the next, and the next. He kept clutching his book because he didn't want to make any noise putting it down. Yet he wondered if he should be making noise, acting normal, so he could come upon the secret meeting casually. "Oh, hi guys, I didn't know you were down here. Can I help?" There was nothing normal about walking around Hendrix in the middle of the night. Luke stayed quiet. When he rounded the corner of the second flight of stairs, he could begin to distinguish words. The only person who seemed to be talking was Jason. Nothing new about that. Luke crouched behind the half wall that surrounded the stairs. He listened closely. But it's too soon, Jason was pleading. Luke risked a peek over the banister. Maybe Trey was there, and he would call out, "Hey, Lee, glad you're here. I was hoping you'd come." But Jason appeared to be alone. He was talking into a small portable phone. At least that's what Luke thought it was. He'd never seen one before except in sketches in his science textbook. Jason was facing the other way, so Luke kept watching and listening. "I told you, there's no danger in waiting," he exclaimed. "They're just sitting ducks." Jason was silent, listening. He turned slightly, and Luke caught a glimpse of the side of his face. Jason's expression was dead serious. Luke thought about all the time he'd seen Jason joking, joshing, prodding, mocking. Luke wouldn't have thought Jason could be 100% serious about anything. He seemed like a different boy. Frightened, Luke ducked out of sight. "I've got 4 and she's got 2, Jason said, "but I could have more by the end of the week." 4 and 2 and more of what? Luke wondered. "Well, I don't know about Nina," Jason said. "You'd have to ask her, but she says girls are harder to recruit." Girls? Luke thought he'd solved the puzzle. Jason was making plans for some action against the government, something like the rally but safer, Luke hoped. He was telling someone how many boys and girls, how many ex-nays were available to help. Except the group that met in the woods had 9 boys now, with Luke and 5 girls. Hadn't Jason told Luke once that the whole group wasn't brave enough yet to be subversives? Luke wondered whom Jason was counting and whom he was leaving out. Trey was pretty timid, so were several of the others. What about Luke? What if Jason wasn't including Luke because Luke hadn't gone to the meeting in the woods that evening? Or because he knew that Luke was secretly the biggest chicken of all? Luke started to stand up to say, "Wait, count me in." His legs were quivering, but he couldn't make himself be brave. He'd have to. Jason had his back turned to Luke again. He was practically snarling into the phone right now. "You want names? All right, I'll give you the ones I have. Antonio Blancas, alias Samuel Ivering. Denton Weathers, alias Travis Spencer. Sherman Kaminsky, alias Ryan Mann. Patrick Kerrigan, alias Tyrone Jansen." Jason was saying the boys' real names. Luke was so thrilled he couldn't speak. If he'd told Jason his real name, he could just imagine hearing Luke Gardner, subversive for the cause, coming to the aid of third children everywhere. Forget the alias. It didn't matter. Jason shifted his portable phone in his hand, and Luke had a terrible thought. What if Jason's phone was bugged? Then Luke realized something even worse. Since it was a portable phone, the population police didn't even have to bug it. Luke had learned in science and technology class just last week that portable phones sent out messages indiscriminately. Didn't Jason know that? All the population police needed was a receiver. And of course they had one. They had everything. Luke rushed out from his hiding place and took the last flights of stairs in 2 leaps. He had to get the phone away from Jason before he accidentally betrayed another boy's identity. Jason still had his back to Luke. He was saying indignantly into the phone, "Of course I'll get the others to tell me their real names. They're just cagey. They do trust me. They don't have any idea I work for the population police." Chapter 27. Luke had his hand inches from the phones when Jason's words registered. "I work for the population police." Luke's hand and arm kept going, even though his mind was suddenly frozen. He watched his hand as if it belonged to someone else. His fingers grasped the phone, jerked it out of Jason's grip, and threw it to the ground. Then Luke's foot, acting as independently as his hand, stomped on it. Jason whirled around. "You!" he spat. Luke's frozen mind was struggling to thaw. Strange facts were emerging from the ice. Jason worked for the population police. That's why he hadn't cared about using a portable phone. He wasn't organizing subversive activity against the government. He was turning in the ex-nays. "You're an informer," Luke whispered. Jason's eyes narrowed, calculatingly. Luke instantly saw his mistake. Why hadn't he played dumb? He could have pretended he hadn't heard Jason's last sentence. He could have acted hurt that Jason was leaving him out. He could have begged for a dangerous assignment. It wouldn't have been too hard to act dumb. Until 2 seconds ago, he had been. "Now, Lee," Jason said cautiously. He seemed to be trying to decide how to play things. Was Luke going to get, oh, don't be silly, what would make you think that? Or, why would I turn in anybody when I'm an next day too? Or, so you know the truth. That's it? You're dead? Jason took a step towards Luke. Luke clutched his history textbook like a shield. Jason came even closer, and then, without thinking, Luke whipped the book and swung it at Jason's head with all his might. Jason crumpled, knocked sideways. He tried desperately to regain his balance. Luke swung again. This time, Jason fell backwards. His head hit the stairs with a loud thunk. His body rolled down to the landing. He didn't move. Luke hardly dared to breathe. He held his book high over his head. Jason still didn't move. What if Luke had killed him? Luke knelt down and put his hand in front of Jason's nose. Very, very faintly, he felt bursts of air every few seconds. Jason wasn't dead, only knocked unconscious. For how long? Luke wasted time staring at Jason's motionless body. Luke wouldn't have wanted to be a murderer, but everything would be easier if Jason were dead. Luke could kill him now. Everything in Luke recoiled against that notion. Jason was the worst kind of fake, an informer, a traitor, someone who pretends to be a friend and then betrays. He probably had as good as killed 4 boys whose only crime was existing. Jason deserved to die. But Luke couldn't kill him. Luke was desperately trying to get his paralyzed brain to come up with another option when the portable phone rang. The noise echoed in the stairwell as shrilly as 100 roosters, all crowing at once. It sounded loud enough to wake the dead, not to mention the merely unconscious. Luke grabbed the phone just to shut it up. It kept ringing. Luke stared at it stupidly. He'd never actually touched a phone before tonight. Didn't they stop ringing when you picked them up? He punched buttons on the phone at random. Finally, miraculously, the noise stopped. Luke let out a sigh of relief. Why had the phone rung in the first place? Jason had been using it. Then Luke pulled it away and stomped on it. That must have worked, like hanging up. But for it to start ringing again, someone was calling Jason. Fearfully, Luke put his phone to his ear. Hello? He whispered. He had a sudden moment of hope. Maybe he'd misunderstood. Maybe Jason hadn't said he worked for the population police, but that the X-Nays didn't trust him because they thought he might work for the population police, or that the X-Nays didn't trust anyone because of the population police. Maybe the person on the other end of the line was a good guy, working for the cause, worried that something had happened to poor, noble, misunderstood Jason. Hello? Luke whispered again. Don't you ever pull that kind of stunt on me again. The angry voice on the other end came through the phone as forcefully as a tornado. You hang up on the population police, you're a dead man. We'll kill you even before we kill those 4 X-Nays you just turned in. Luke's hope dissolved. He struggled to keep his mind from dissolving too. Think. He'd heard Jen's dad fool the population police once. Mr. Talbot had lied so smoothly that even Luke, who knew the truth, was practically convinced. Luke put his hand over his mouth. He had to make the man on the other end of the line think he was Jason. I'm sorry, Luke muttered. It was a mistake. I accidentally dropped the phone and it shut off by itself, with a little help from Luke's foot. What? I can't hear you, the man yelled. It's a bad connection, Luke said, speaking louder. He'd heard Mother and Dad say that all the time. He hoped portable phones could have bad connections too. I said I was sorry. I dropped the phone by mistake. I didn't hang up on you. Why would I hang up on you when I'm trying to convince you to give me more time? Whatever, the man growled. Luke could tell. The man didn't care what had happened. He just wanted Jason to grovel. And Luke had done it for him. Luke was good at groveling. Here's how it is, the man continued. We'll give you another day. Then that's it. And Jason, you get those other boys, or else. We've got a quota to fill, you know. The phone clicked. Luke realized the man on the other end had hung up. Luke had fooled him, and he'd bought some time. He had another day, or until Jason woke up. And that is where we will end for today. Definitely did not see that coming, did we? Maybe some of you did. Maybe not. But we will continue tomorrow. Have a great day, guys. Bye.